Welcome to the Weaver podcast. I'm Sonja Wood, a mediator, conflict management expert, neuroscience enthusiast, and positive psychology practitioner. This podcast is for the leaders, the decision makers who already know that relationships shape everything: your success, your impact, your well being. Here, we go beyond surface level advice to explore the deep shift that create real change in how you navigate conflict, communication, and connection. So if you're ready to refine the way you lead, you relate and influence, you're in the right place. This is part of a series where I'm having a discussion with other women around dynamics in relationships, more focused around family or personal relationships, because I also talk about dynamics in the workplace, which is also very interesting to see the parallel between personal and professional life. But this theory here is more focused on personal relationships. That's, however, whenever I do mediation, whenever I deal with conflict where people, for example, have a personal, intimate relationship or friendship or a close relationship in a workplace environment where it's almost friends, but it's not very clear, I see a lot of toxic patterns. But I would love to have first your short presentation because you're Tandy at Florida. But what do you do now?
Well, in my real life, outside of social media, I am a personal trainer. As a matter of fact, I have been a personal trainer for 19 years in June. So I I know I'm very youthful looking, but
You
I
look
am
gorgeous.
almost, thank you, thank you. But I became a personal trainer. I was almost 50 years old. And so I am almost 70 years old. And so I find it kind of amazing. I amaze myself that I'm still doing this. As a matter of fact, I put a sweater on over my gym clothes. I just came from the gym a little while ago. In my real world, I have been training people in the gym. And in 2014, I started a traveling training, and I would go to, I have vast credentials in the fitness and health industry and in trauma informed teachings that I've been contracted with our Wounded Warrior Project. You may have heard of that. I've been contracted in the behavioral health unit in a local hospital. The hospital is now closed. It's been a few years ago. I did travel to numerous assisted living facilities, teaching exercise or fitness, sometimes yoga, just depend on the facility and the ability and mobility of the patients. And I also do personal training and private yoga classes to corporate and businesses and going to people's homes. So for all these years, I just love being able to get in my car and scoot over here and exercise and scoot over there and exercise. It keeps me really active, and I just love doing that. So I did mention earlier in our pre-recording conversation that I owned a yoga studio. So I did personal training out of my yoga studio, as well as probably every genre of exercise that you can name. I've probably taught some variation of along the way. So I do that. That pretty much sustains me. I am a widow, so I do get my husband's survivor's benefit. So I have that as a cushion. And for several years, I've been maintaining and building an online presence to sell my services online. So that kind of keeps me out of trouble.
You look very, for those who will look at this on YouTube, we can see the light. It's
Oh,
very, and not just from the camera, but it lights you up when you talk about this, and it's such for me so inspirational. I'm obviously younger, and it's just where I want to walk toward to. being at your age and being that fit and that motivated and that lighted up by what I do. It's really a big inspiration. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. And it's a blessing. It doesn't escape me.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful every day that I get to do this.
Yeah, of course. So I have few questions for you, but we were briefly at the introduction addressing that our main topic of discussion today is toxic family patterns.
Mhm.
What would you, there is a lot of things on internet around that. I don't know if it's a trend. I don't know if it's because people now open their eyes and talk about it more. But
Mhm.
what would you personally assess as something being toxic versus, sometimes, well, it's known as sibling just fight, it's a thing they do, or or the pressure is just something that exists. So what would you put behind toxic family pattern?
Oh, well, hold on to your seat, sister, because I got some news for you.
All right.
Um, I can only go by my personal experience in my own family. Um, the word toxic can encompass a lot of things. Uh, Narcissism, gaslighting, manipulation, mental abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, gambling abuse, or gambling addiction. And all of that has been in my family. And I grew up in that toxic environment. Um, and I mentioned my age. Back then, none of this was talked about, whether it was um, the abuser in my family was my mother, and to the best of my knowledge, she's still living. Um, but she was, to my knowledge, never diagnosed with any mental disorders. I just grew up. I was a little kid. That was my mom. That's what was our life, and that was just normal. We didn't know any different. Like nowadays with all the information available in our hands and our phones, even if there's a child being abused, someone's called right away, and there can be addressed, or someone at the school knows it or something, and that wasn't available to us when I was a child. And I'm the oldest of four, and so each of them had some degree of and variation of my mother's personalities. And because I left home very young, I was a teenager, to get away from her mostly. And so that's not even where that all ended. That personality disorder and her toxic traits have always been there throughout all of our lives. And that's why I say, to the best of my knowledge, she is probably still living, but she's been very ill for a very long time. And I moved away. I grew up in the Louisville, Kentucky area, and in my young 20s, I ended up in the Boston area, and I lived there for a very long time, for like 22 years, just about the same time I've been here in Florida. So I didn't have a close relationship with her. Her gambling addiction was not something I was fully aware of, or to the extent of how bad it was, until I got married. And then she kind of latched on to me, because every time she asked for money, my husband would say yes. And so that toxic trait followed. And I had my sister, being the oldest of four, the sister next down from me, um, she just went on a different path. And we all had our lives. I have a brother and a younger sister who have had more of a quote unquote normal life, if you will, getting married, raising children, more of a stable family dynamics. And that's wonderful. And I'm so happy that that happened for them. But my sister, I just mentioned, she passed away last year because of all of her choices of drugs and alcohol. And it's
Mm.
just really hard to see someone who was this beautiful young woman, has a daughter, then had grandchildren, and just not have whatever it would have taken for her to see the value of her own life really until the very end. She was in
Yeah.
hospice for about 6 months before she passed away. And you know that's out of sequence for any of us. You know, as the oldest, you don't think your younger siblings are going to die before you,
Mm.
and that was very hard place to be and to accept. So that toxic life, it was a toxic life. And I would say, because of that, speaking of the dynamics of relationships, because of the way I always felt, I guess, about myself up until a certain point in my life, um, the people I chose to be in relationships with, whether it was girlfriends or boyfriends or even a marriage, that um, that all showed up. You know, it all played out. And, you know, being in a relationship with someone, and really this is hindsight, is 2020, to notice the fact that there was two people who were injured children playing out those roles in their adult lives, you know. And of course, at the time, it was just a lot of fighting and lying and cheating and drinking and those kinds of things. And then, I mean, not to shadow that there were some good places along the way, but that was the main theme in my life, was choosing people that I couldn't really have a relationship with or relate to, or never felt um, like I was being loved the way I felt I needed to. And of course, this is all in hindsight, because I started my healing journey about 20 years ago. So, like, it took most of my life to figure out how to heal from trauma and then grow from that and not let
So
that. Go ahead.
yeah, we're gonna talk about healing a little after. It's on the questions I have, but what
Okay.
you're talking about is already very interesting, and I have already many questions for you. Um, but back a little bit, back in time. So at this time, you're still the young you, coming to become an adult. You perceive something is wrong. You perceive the environment is not right. What at this time in your life, what are you thinking? Even before talking about being involved in romantic relationship, what are you thinking? Because there is many people who are, I believe, leaving toxic relationships, being in toxic environment, and yet don't quit, don't leave the place, stay in it. I'm always very fascinated and yet sad at the same time that some people do quit, some people stay in that toxic, abusive place. So, what are you thinking at that time that makes you quit?
Well, for me personally, I think I was just a wild child. You know, I grew up in a time where mm, there was a lot of freedom around me, and I made choices, and I grew up very fast. I had to. I don't know how much I can say here that you might feel comfortable hearing, but some
I can
things
always
happen.
cut if I can always
Uh,
cut
oh,
the pieces if
okay,
needed.
then
No.
I was sexually assaulted when I was 11 years old,
Mm.
so I did not have what I would call a normal childhood.
Yeah.
And I think that set the tone for a lot of maybe feeling, and I didn't know these words back then. This is all the adult me looking back at that younger version of me. Um, Lack of self esteem, lack of self respect, no boundaries. Um, and, and, and it was a time in my life, like when I went to high school, a majority of the kids that I knew were all doing drugs and hanging out and partying, and I know that kids will do that, but that became a lifestyle for me, and it was like a normal thing. And it took a very long time of my life to get away from that lifestyle, and I and it could just be my personal opinion, but I feel like when you choose to do any kind of substance abuse, you do not respect who you are.
Mm.
You are trying to hide from that or bury that or numb yourself from your reality or your pain. But the breaking point with my mother was she became physically abusive, and I was just, I'm out. And I was
Yeah.
old enough to say, I got pregnant when I was 16 and she made me have an abortion. And 3 months later, I left and I never went back. And because she made it seem like having kids ruined her life. And so I came out into the world really with no self-respect. I didn't even know what that meant, really. But to circle back to why people stay, in those days, she probably didn't have choices. She probably didn't have a place to go or find support for whatever she was dealing with, you know? So I think as women, being a minority in this world, that men have always been in control of us as best as they are able to be. And I don't want to upset anybody by saying that, but back when my grandparents stayed married for all those decades, there was that's what they did. It
Yeah.
didn't matter who was being abused or who was lying or cheating. They just stayed together and for like 70 years or something. So the woman just didn't have the options that are available today. But like, I was married for 10 years to someone, and the abuse, if you want to call it abuse, was more about being in control. And because being in control is a form of abuse, he was in control of the money. I did live a very comfortable lifestyle, but I can remember standing in my big, beautiful house one day looking out the window, and I just kind of laughed at myself because prior to that experience, I can recall being the outsider looking in, driving down a nice neighborhood and seeing a beautiful home
Yeah.
with all the cars and going, oh, I wonder what it's like to live like that. And then when I had that, and I was not happy in my marriage, none of that stuff really meant anything. It made me
Yeah.
comfortable. It was nice. It was nice to have the money and the sports cars and all of that stuff. And I liked having it, but if it doesn't make you happy in your heart, and I could have left. I moved across country to be with him. It was not an easy thing to do. I kind of came in with nothing. I would have had to have left with nothing. And then the last couple of years, he was quite ill before he passed away, and I stayed. No one can say that I just abandoned him when he was nearing the end of
That's a
life.
difficult time. Yeah, I think it requires a lot of courage to do what you did.
Thank you.
How did you? I believe that the environment we grow up in shapes, or at least it depend if people are really interested into that. I would highly recommend it to read about epigenetic theories and studies and science. But a lot of the environment we grow up in also shapes who we become and how we the level of you were saying about self-esteem and confidence that we develop. And I'm very, very curious to hear more about how did you develop more confidence and self-esteem and how that experience in your early years shaped who you were going toward to either it was in a friend's relationship or your former husband. Do you still husband when you're widow? I'm not sure, but the person you shared life with, or how did that impacted the people you were attracting or who you were going toward?
Before I started my healing journey, I attract, there's a common saying, you attract who you are,
Mm.
or you are the sum total of the five people you hang around with the most. And I always say, well, if you're hanging out at the bar with 5 drunks, you're a drunk. And pretty much, and I worked in bars for 15 years before I moved to Florida. And I'm not going to say I didn't have a lot of fun with those people, but they had not a lot of ambition. That was a lifestyle, and there was a lot of things available that are detrimental to your health in that environment. And for me personally, I think you just have to hit a rock bottom, and you either hit the rock bottom and die, you hit the rock bottom and you stay there, or you hit the rock bottom and you pull your bootstraps up and you make something out of your life. And that's basically what I decided was I wanted something different for myself. And I was in a relationship that was not very healthy. And I left him and moved cross country to start over. And that's when I married my husband. And that's when I decided to take control of my health and and change my life. Mm-hmm. So it was quite the journey. I'm quite petite. I'm 5 feet tall. Most people wouldn't know that because I got a big ass personality, but I'm a little tiny gal. As a matter of fact, a girl at the gym I've known for years walked past me this morning and patted me on top of the head. I'm like, really? So, but I say that because 22 years ago, I was 100 pounds overweight and I had type 2 diabetes. And when I decided to take control of my life and my health again, I went to, I don't, you're probably too young to remember a gym called Curves, but there was a Curves over on Cocoa Beach down the street. When I first moved to Florida, I lived in Cocoa Beach, and it was a silly little gym for older women. And but I felt good. I was there and I was doing the things. I've always been very tiny. I probably weighed 102 pounds through my whole younger life. And then I beat myself up pretty bad with alcohol and food mostly. And, in denial, I didn't realize I was so overweight. I just didn't look in mirrors, and I just got really sick of all of that one day. And so I was real happy. I moved to Florida. I had health insurance. I got a doctor. I went to the doctor one day and, she'd been tracking everything for me and my blood work because of the diabetes. I think the turning point was when I learned that type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle disease. And I had done this to myself. And so I decided to do something about it. And I went to the doctor one day and I'd lost about 25 pounds. And I felt really good about that. And she goes, that's just great. She goes, Curves is for little old ladies. And not only can you do more, you have to do more. And she gave me a business card of her personal trainer, who ended up being my personal trainer for years. And he helped me in about a little less than 2 years, lose 100 pounds and reverse type 2 diabetes. That's the catalyst to my becoming a personal trainer. And that was in 2006. So as I mentioned early on, I'm coming up on my 19-year anniversary of being a personal trainer. So that changed everything. And then somewhere shortly after that, within a couple of years, I went back to college at 50 and got a business degree. And I would schedule my business classes around my yoga classes at the YMCA. And one day this little gal came up to me and she goes, are you a yoga teacher? You're so good. And I had like a light bulb moment. Oh, I'm going to be a yoga teacher now. And so I pursued that. And then I was teaching yoga in a little studio locally here on the island. And about a year into that, the owner was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer at 42. And I bought the studio from her and she passed away. And I owned the studio for about almost 8 years. And we closed in 2020 when the world kind of shut down with the COVID lockdown and everything. Okay. So I loved all of that. I've taken all of that great stuff. I'm going to digress for one moment. This was a turning point for me when I started practicing yoga, when I was doing all the teacher training to become a yoga teacher very early on. I signed up for a teacher training. It was in Orlando. And I remember so many details. I walked into this, it was some sportsplex for the Orlando Magic. So it was a huge facility. It was beautiful. We had this large room. There was 52 people in there learning to be yoga teachers. And it was a 2-day course. And on the second day, we had a very intensive yoga class that lasted about 2.5 hours. And in Shavasana, I was
Wow.
laying there, and this woman that was leading the class read a poem called "The Station" by Robert Hastings. I highly recommend you read it.
Okay.
You can go online and just look up Robert Hastings' "The Station." And a tear ran out of my eye, and I could feel it running down my face. I get emotional every time I say this, but it was the first time in my life that I loved who I was. And I will never forget that. I spent 5 decades on this planet before I knew how to love myself. And so yoga, as cliche as it sounds, can change your life. And it changed my life forever. And so, yes, all the programming from our childhood and who we are programmed to be up until about age 7 is where we learn all the things that's going to carry us into many years of our life, and all the things that we go through and all the ways we handle it and all the people that cross our path and all the family members and all the friends and relationships and lovers that come along help form the person that we're becoming. We're always becoming. We don't just arrive at this place and this is who I am and this is where I've been planning to land. That's why that poem, The Station, it's a journey. It's always going to be a journey. So we're always evolving and growing, and it never stops until we're no longer here. So that turning point in my life just changed everything. Like I quit I quit drinking. I that was a huge part of my young life, and my whole body rejects it. Like I don't want to live that way. I don't want to wake up and feel like crap. And trust me, the older you get, you don't bounce back either. Like
Yeah.
when you're young, you can party and drink all night and go to work the next day and be perfectly fine. Like, and now you'd be like devastated for 2 days.
Yeah, it's
It's
what I've
just,
heard.
it's
But
not worth it.
if it
Yeah.
makes you help, if it helps you feel better. I'm 45 and I still, if drinking any, that's gonna be a glass of wine every 6 months. So even now, I don't, I can't just bear the headache anymore, or the mouth being kind of weird or the next. I can't even at 35. So I'm not. I think the metabolism can't handle it as good when you get older. But I
Right.
also think it's a matter of how you want to feel. And I think I knew our conversation would be really good and very inspirational for me, and I think for many others who will listen. But I didn't think it would be that good because everything you said, I feel it's the embodiment of you made a choice, and I don't see anything better than that to be the proof of you decide first, and that
Yes.
nothing can hold you back if you make the
Yeah,
decision for yourself. And
exactly.
I love that you bring up the age because I hear sometimes people thinking, "Oh, I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm hitting 70 and it's too late now, I'm gonna retire. I can't do that anymore. It's too late." And I'm like, "Damn it. You're still living. I mean, the day it's too late, you're dead." So it's incredible that you show as a living proof that no matter the age, if you want to change, you change.
Yes.
And so I
And
understand that going to Florida, so you decided first, but then you choose an environment where you felt better, and that environment brought other people in your life.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel very blessed that, uh, first of all, to point on something you just said, being in this industry, and I'm a nutrition coach, and I wear many hats. And I'll also point out that I've been vegan since 1992, which is a very hard thing for people to understand what that means. And I don't talk about it too much, but I also have boundaries around what I'll do that where I'm not comfortable. Like I don't want to go to a barbecue, like
Okay.
I'm not doing it for health reasons. I do it because I love animals and I don't believe they should be treated the way they are. And there's a whole lot. And I could get on my soapbox about that. Believe me, I did extensive research in the 30 something years that I've been this way. But when I work with people, and people are kind of funny, I can't care more about their health than they do. Because what you said, people have to make the decision. No one's going to change until they decide.
Yeah.
And it's totally on them. You could have someone in your life that you love dearly, and you can see they have horrible habits and it's detrimental to their health. But if they're not doing anything about it, nothing you say was going to make a difference until they decide that they need to change. And that, it doesn't matter what their vice is. It could be anything, but until they decide to do something that leans in the direction of a healthier lifestyle, we can't make anybody do that. And believe me, I have a client right now that a week ago tomorrow, last Wednesday, met her at the gym, 73, very deconditioned. I've known her for 5 years, but not in personal training. She just hired me a couple months ago. And she let me know Wednesday morning. She goes, I'm not going to renew after this package. I'm just going to try to do this on my own. I understand that because my fee is not cheap. That same day, she got admitted to the hospital with a kidney stone. And the doctor told her it's because you're not moving and you're not drinking. And those are like two of the main things I say to people all the time. You got to move and stay hydrated, So I said I can't care more about her health than she does. And if she
Mm.
just comes to the gym twice a week, and I say this also to people when it's appropriate, there's 168 hours in a week. You see me for 2 hours. What you do those other 166 hours is on you. You know,
Yeah.
you can't out exercise bad habits. Like, and I've known people when they were younger, personal trainers that partied it up and drank and would go to the gym and try to sweat all that out. And I might have done that once or twice. I don't know, but
I think
yeah,
I think that's a good point, and I can only agree with that.
yeah,
Um, Now, because you brought up so changing environments and shifting identities, so leaving behind what you felt was not right for you anymore. When we talk about family relationships, many times there is this loyalty, and there is times where I feel what keeps people in a place is, but it's family. I have to be there. It's family. It's my parents. I have to stay. It's my family. I have to be there for them. And even though it's toxic, even though it's family relationship, I don't believe you owe anything to anyone, family or not. But then I know my belief is very controversial because I know there is, and depending what education you received, you're gonna have a big sense of service, and you're gonna probably think that no matter what, you have to be there for family. It's also to have more discernment. Is that from a place of anger or from a place of deep reflection and evolution? Because when you're a kid, you may be reacting to anger. I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't want to hear about it. I'm done. Then the more you grow up, the more you do the work, the evolution, the more you reflect and you choose what is good for you or not. You choose who you want those five people to be around.
right,
And
yes.
so, did you experience this family loyalty that you had to maybe detach from, that you had to heal from, and even more from the mother lineage, if it was your mother you had problem with, how did you handle that?
Sadly, and I agree with everything you just laid out. I'm not sure if it was loyalty would be the word I would describe for us, as much as when I was very young, always wondering why my mother didn't love me. And she was unavailable. She was emotionally detached. You know, she was very cold. It was not until I got a little bit older that she became physically abusive. Um, I have many times in my life tried to reconnect with her and have a relationship with her. And it would go along for a while. And then it always came back down to her addiction. And so when I got married in 2003, I had lived away from my family already for 20 years. So I didn't know firsthand about the extent of her gambling. So when I got married is when I really first started seeing it. First of all, I moved from Boston to Florida. And then 2 weeks later, my husband and I flew out to Las Vegas to get married with an Elvis impersonator. And he flew about 15 people out, including my mother. That's when I could see her in action. I got up one night, couldn't sleep, went downstairs to the casino, and there was my mother sitting at a slot machine putting $100 bills in. And she didn't know I was standing there. And I just watched her for a little while, and I turned around and walked away. And I went, oh, okay. I was getting more of a wake up call about where she was at. And then she was losing all of her money and then asking me for money. And I'm not a gambler. Like my husband would give me $100 bill. I'd go to the window, cash it for 20s, then take a 20 and cash it for quarters. And then I'd take the $80 and I put it in my pocketbook. And I was just happy as could be. I'm just spending quarters on the slot machines, having fun. Like you should be having fun if you're in Las Vegas. And she got to a point where she'd lost all of her money and asked me for money. And I had accumulated several $100s. So I gave it to her so she could get a taxi when she got home from the airport or whatever. And it only escalated from there, her
Yeah.
asking for money. And, 1,000 here, 3,000 there. And then there was a point, and I can remember the year, I don't remember the date, in 2004, she had called and asked to borrow $12,000. And my husband said, yes. And I said, no. And we had a hurricane take off part of our roof, and I was putting a new roof on my house. And the day that I said no to her, I did not know where she was or hear from her for 8 years. And I was devastated by that. You know, I wanted my mother in my life, but it just was what it was. And we can't go back in time and change anything. Like I said earlier, people only change when they want to. And she doesn't think she has to change. She just thinks she's just fine the way she is. She's miserable and bitter and hateful. She's hard to talk to. And that pains me to say that about my mother. And the last time I tried to have a relationship with her, I just could not. And, because of the lies, because addicts, no matter what you're addicted to, lie. They just lie for whatever they need and for whoever they need to talk to get something. And usually that's money. And
Yeah.
when I found her after those 8 years and we reconnected, we went on for maybe a year or so. And then one day she had sent me an email and she just very casually said, I just tried a little dabble at some online gambling. And then she called me not too long after that and asked to borrow money. And I said no. And I didn't hear from her again for a very long time until she sent me an email to let me know my sister was in hospice. And that was October of 23. And
Do
so
you I have just a short question about that because it resonates for a personal perspective. Um, do you think that sending out money under manipulative psychological manipulation is the underlying research for love or needs to be seen by the parents? Would you say that by giving her the money, you were hoping secretly that she would finally validate you, see you, appreciate you?
Uh, there could have been some part of that. I think at this point, as I have gone through the life that I lived and finally got to a place, and now I'm married and I'm living in this situation, and I was very comfortable. Um, it did feel very much like manipulation. It did not feel like she was trying to have a loving relationship. I mean, I could see more clearly what it appeared to be than my going, oh, well, if I give her money, maybe we'll, get back on track and have this great relationship. I never felt like that was going to be the end to the means of, the money part. Um, and it wasn't just her. My sister who passed away and her daughter, my niece, my oldest niece,
Mhm.
were always hitting me up for money. My sister had a drug problem. Oh, they're going to shut my electric off and, I need some money. And I'm like, well, give me the numbers and I'll call them and pay your account. No, I need the money. Just all the stuff. And I already knew all that. I grew up a certain way around certain people. I've heard all the BS that you could ever hear around people with addiction. And so, I don't know who they thought they were talking to, but and I helped. But what I realized in my own journey of healing, a lot of that was I was the enabler. I wasn't trying to validate the relationship. And yes, I'm your loving daughter. I'm your loving sister. Here, have everything I have. I'll help you. At one point, I flew my sister to Florida, took a part of my house and made her an apartment and gave her an opportunity to start over. And within weeks, I caught her in the middle of the night doing drugs in my house. You can't make people change. Even when you lay it out on a silver platter and spend thousands of dollars, it meant nothing. It meant nothing.
Yeah.
And I made her go. I said, you have to pack up and you have to leave. And the first thing she did was pack up and go stay at a friend's where she could party for 2 weeks before she found a way to get on a plane and back to Indiana. So
So I
I
must
would,
ask,
ma'am.
so you said your sister passed away a few years ago. How did you manage that situation, knowing that I didn't know if you had kept contact with her or barely, but how did you handle? Because I can, and let me know if I'm wrong, but I can guess there's a sort of grieving process of a certain
Definitely.
relationship you wish you would have had with either your sister or your mother. And yeah, tell me about that grieving process and how the real passing away of the person, the body passing away, how did that merge together with the grieving that had already occurred about the relationship?
As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I found out my sister. I digress again. I knew my sister was ill for quite some time
Mm.
because of her lifestyle choices, primarily, um, but not any close contact. And my mother emailed me and let me know my sister was in hospice in about mid to late October of 23. My sister passed away last year in February of 24. In November, finally, I had a phone number from my sister. She answered the phone. And that was the first time we had a conversation in a very long time. And I said this to myself the night of that conversation. It was the most wonderful, loving, sisterly, forgiving conversation two sisters could have. and we talked for about 45 minutes, and she had to go because she wasn't feeling well, and she was already in the hospice. And I hung up the phone, and I said to myself then, if that's the last conversation I ever have with my sister, it was beautiful, and I'm so grateful. And then several months went by, and there was no real conversations. You know, she was just really very ill. It was hard to see her in the condition that she was in. She looked like a little skeleton. My sister was a beautiful woman, and to see that was very hard. And my brother, who lived near her, he still lives there. Um, would go visit her, and then do like the last 3 days of her life, would do a FaceTime, and she couldn't talk, but she could hear my voice and she knew I was there. Yes, the grief of the years lost of not having the relationship because of drugs and alcohol is very difficult. There was no changing her. You know, even when I tried to help, I had to accept that I was enabling her to be able to continue what she was doing. And when I stopped, that's when the relationship stopped. So that was one part of the grieving. And then just the actual realization that she is actually physically gone. And there's an old saying, and I heard Melanie Ann Lair say this story once about someone that passed away, and her grandmother said, there's 3 times when we die. And once when the physical body leaves, another time when the funeral is over, and that last time is when no one ever says your name again. And so every single morning, I light a candle and I say my sister's name, and I keep her alive in my heart. I know she's one of my angels. I know she loved me. She just got caught up in a life, and there was no saving her. And you can't save somebody that doesn't want to be saved or even think that they need to be saved. She was complacent with her lifestyle choices, and the grieving process is it never goes away. It never leaves. It morphs into other things, and we just learn to live without the physical presence of the person that we've lost. But it was hard, and it's still hard. You can tell I'm very upset.
Yeah, it's all right.
You know, but it has made me more determined than ever to always become a better version of myself than I was yesterday. I don't compete with anybody. I just compete with myself to make better choices, to take as best care of myself as I can. And it's hard. You know, when my sister died, I didn't feel like eating for months, and I had to eat, you know. So here I am, this fitness professional, eating cheese sandwiches for lunch for 6 months, you know, like I just had to do something. But we just do what we can, and then we move on. And then you have this realization that that's not how my sister would want me to live, you know. So I had to just take my life back again. And I feel like we always are going to go through these things in our life, you know. Like, I don't know how I'm going to feel when I find out that my mother has passed away. She's been quite ill for some time. She's been talking about how sick she is for 20 years. She's an avid cigarette smoker, and she has something, and I'm never sure I pronounce this correctly, interstitial cystitis, which is also known as painful bladder disease from smoking cigarettes. She still smokes, and you can't, she's not going to change. She's not going to stop smoking now. Why bother? I would say she's probably 85 years old now. And she was quite young when she had me, by the way. She was 16. And I think that was part of her
Reaction. Yeah.
problems that went through our young life. But you know, you can't make people change. And even when they want to, sometimes they just don't have whatever that is internally to make that shift. And I don't know if therapy helps. I don't know if exercise helps. I mean, exercise is a huge catalyst in lifestyle change. It can make a world of difference because it just does so many wonderful things for you, for, for your just everything, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all the things. And it sounds silly to say that, but if you get on that journey, you know how good it makes you feel. You're more conscientious of all the things you choose for yourself in life. You sleep better. You just have a more calm way of moving through this planet, through all the crazy world that we live in and have to deal with, and things that are thrown at us every day. And how do we do that and stay sane through all of it, and exercise is a huge part of that. So I think that's one of the things that I can default to always: meditation, exercise, yoga, pranayama. I use a variety of tools that I've learned through the years just to help me be who I am, so that I can be of service to the people that hire me to help them, and not take on their energy.
You talked about yoga, and as an avid practitioner of yoga, not necessarily at the best level of yoga, but I've been doing that for 9 years straight, almost every morning. Allow 1% error into that. I like to sleep in on weekends, but I know how deeply it changed me inside, healed anxiety patterns and other things.
Right.
I'm very fascinated by the philosophy around yoga. So people think, we talk about yoga, people may think about the movement, but what I believe is even most interesting is the philosophy around yoga. Can you talk about forgiveness in context of your healing journey?
Yep.
Forgiveness to your mother, forgiveness to your sister, to the family bonds that were toxic? Or is that still in process? How do you deal with that?
I can tell you the number one person that needs to be forgiven is myself.
Mm-hmm.
I forgave myself first. And once I was at that place where, um, when it was really dawning on me, the things that happened to me in childhood were not my fault. And I carried that weight for a long time. I wondered what was wrong with me. What did I do? How did I make her hate me? I carried that weight for a huge number of years in my life. And I forgave myself because I didn't deserve that. And once I did that, then the forgiveness for for my mother and for my sister, they don't even have to know I forgave them. It's a peace that comes with the forgiveness, and and that doesn't change them. I could say to my mother, Judy, I forgive you. And here's what she'd say: well, I guess you think I ruined your life. Like she's disconnected. And that's okay. She can. I'm not trying to change her, not at this late date or anything, but I do forgive her. And I know this might sound cliche, and there's talk around. I've heard people say that's no excuse or whatever. I really do believe she did the best she could with what she could work with, and she was a child. Her and my dad were 16. By the time she was 21, she had 4 children. And I mean, that's a lot. And I did not know until well into my adult life that she had tried to commit suicide when I was about 5 years old. And I didn't know. So there was a lot of things. There's a lot of things. I didn't have a relationship with my grandparents. He died, my grandfather died when I was a baby. And my grandmother ousted my mother. She didn't have a relationship. And so that went on most of my life. I didn't know my grandmother on my mother's side. Now, my grandmother on my father's side, my father's been deceased since 1994, very young. Um, But my grandmother, his mother, is still living, and she's going to be 104 years old. So
Wow.
she basically raised me, and was the mother I didn't have in all those years that my mother was missing in my life. I did have that maternal support from my dad's mom, and we are now pen pals because she's deaf and we can't talk on the phone anymore. But during the whole COVID thing for 3 years, I called my grandmother every single night. And it was a little taxing on me, I have to say, especially when her hearing started to go and she just could not hear me say anything. I'd ask her a question and she'd just go off on something because she just liked to talk. But now we pen pal. But to have that forgiveness, it starts with us, just to find that peace. I'm so grateful for that. Like the lifestyle that I've carved out for myself at this point. I'm single. I we talked, I don't drink. I don't even know what it would be like to party. None of that appeals to me. I'm very focused on health. I'm very focused on building a business so that I don't see retirement. I love what I do, and it keeps me young. It keeps me moving. It keeps me in shape. I just am not one of, and I live in a state where people just work their whole life and want to come and retire and sit on the beach and drink beer all day. And I just can't do that.
For you. Well, I
Yeah.
don't know where your next move is gonna be, but if you're vegan, I'm not sure about Texas for you.
Oh no, no, Texas does not appeal to me at all. Actually, um, you're funny. I've been a few places that I wouldn't mind, and I can understand the whole snowbird thing where you live part of the year somewhere and then part of the year somewhere else. I could see myself doing something like that, but uh, no, I would definitely go somewhere where there was more like-minded people. I've looked at places in Colorado, and I actually have been to Sedona twice, and I love it there. It's very spiritual, and it's also very hot. So I don't know. I lived in Boston for 22 years amongst snowstorms and nor'easters, and I don't know. I just can't see me doing that again. But yeah, I have a lot of places I'd like to go and see and experience different lifestyles, and even if it's just for a short time and that kind of thing. But yeah, the
Taking an
forgiveness
RV and
part.
going around.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Taking an RV and going around.
I actually thought of that too, so or maybe having a condo in a couple of different places and just
Mm.
going one place for, a few months out of the year and then my favorite place or whatever. Florida is lovely. Between November and February, the weather is just perfect. It's warm and it's sunny. Where I live is beautiful. Where you see me sitting, I have a window in front of me. If you can't tell by the light, I'm surrounded by water. I have, my view is of a beautiful river. At the where my unit ends, my balcony is just about 20 steps down to the water. So I just feel so blessed. I get to wake up, open the curtains, and look at this beautiful view, and do my yoga practice and take care of my pets and do whatever it is I do. So I am very grateful for where I'm at, and a lot of that came with my own forgiveness and changing my whole life. When you move, and you know this because you said you've moved a lot to end up in Texas from where you came from. It changes your whole life. And you change with that. You grow into this different version of who you're becoming. Uh, Sometimes just because of your surroundings.
It
So
is true. It is true. I am now cutting wood logs with a splitting axe, which 5 years ago I would never think doing that. I would even laugh at that. I was like,
right.
this
Oh my
is a
goodness.
minute.
So you get it.
Yeah,
So
you
this
enjoy my shift.
this stint in Florida has been um, a part of my growth and healing, and to be here and to be able to talk about that. And I feel it's important that we share our stories because somebody needs to know that they're not alone when they're in a similar situation. Um, The forgiveness I have for my mother is finding peace in my own heart of how much value we are as humans. No one can undermine that. And even if they don't intentionally think, oh, I hate her, she's my daughter, she's awful, I can't stand her, who is she? It doesn't diminish who I am, no matter what anyone says. Um, so people need to know that they're worthy of love, they're worthy of the life that they choose for themselves. You know, you go out into the world, hopefully you're doing more to help and be of service than causing harm. And I say causing harm, it could look like something like environmental. I'm very focused on trying to leave as small a footprint as possible, because this planet is very precious, and there's a lot of things going on that we may feel overwhelmed that we don't have the power to do something about. But if enough of us do a little something, it makes a big something at the end of the day. So just that's how I look at the way I choose to live my life, and and make a difference.
Before ending the hour, do you feel at peace today with what happened?
Yes, I do. I really do. If not, well, I carried that weight for so long. And then and the peace doesn't just come instantly when you set it down, but you make peace with the fact that you can't go back and change anything.
What would you say if someone hears what you're just saying now and listen to the whole episode and can relate to family history somehow and doesn't feel that peace? What would you say to go toward that peaceful feeling, to make peace with the past and peace with people?
It takes work. It takes a lot of work, and it takes maybe dealing with painful memories, and to not hold the feelings in. When we're holding on to anger or pain or any of these negative feelings, it affects our immune system. A lot of times, what we maybe a lot of people are not aware of, your vagus nerve and your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous systems, and how that affects your overall health. And you can be in a toxic situation, family, spouse, whatever, friendships, and hold on to that. And if you don't find a release for it, it will come out somehow in some way. When you hold on to it for long enough, it will, you internalize that. So you don't just have forgiveness. Oh, I forgive you, and I'm all peaceful now. It's a lot of work between the forgiveness and the peace. And but it's worth it. It's worth your life. It's worth your sanity. It's worth your growth. It's worth becoming the next best version of who you're going to be in this life, without letting the toxic environment, the toxic people, and the advents that led all of that to this point define who you are today. And then when you make that decision, not you, but people in general, when they need to know, what am I going to do? Do one thing a day. Nothing happens overnight. Do you know how I lost 100 pounds? 1 pound at a time. And it didn't happen in one day. And it didn't happen in 1 week. It happened with me consistently getting up and putting my gym clothes on and going out the door and going to the gym, even when I didn't feel like it. And even when you don't feel like it and you walk through that door, an hour later, you feel better. And you keep doing that, and you keep doing that. And one day you go, this is a great life. And I love it. And I love my life. And you take some deep breaths and you feel at home in your own body, no matter what you've been through. And you know that that was part of what shaped who I am now. But it's work. And I don't know how long it takes. I don't know how deep the pain is or the injuries are, emotional or physical, spiritual. But you keep putting one foot in front of the other and you don't give up on yourself because you're worth it. You're worth it to have the life that you want to live. Find what rings your bell. Maybe going to the gym and lifting heavy weights is not your thing. Find a class, ride a bike, walk the beach, walk your dog, volunteer. Nothing can make you feel more humble than to do something like volunteer to help somebody less fortunate than you. So that makes a world of difference, because you want to talk about humility, you want to talk about feeling like you made a difference for somebody. Go to a homeless shelter and feed them lunch. You know, I've done that, and it's hard. And it's hard to see that there's people, you think you got it bad, believe me, someone's got it worse. Always, always, always. So you have to be grateful. Every day you wake up and you just say, thank you, God, I got another day. Source, universe, however you want to look at it. Goddess, I always say goddess. You can do whatever you want, whatever your higher power is, whatever your spirit is, whatever that is you look to for guidance in your life. Or if you don't have that, it's there, it's available. You just have to turn towards that light, and you have to
Yeah,
care about yourself.
not that anything is like very. I don't think there's a don't believe there is a hierarchy between people suffering of different things, but it does, from my experience, it does help to understand that we all experience hardships. We
Yes.
all experience trauma on a scale from different degree, and we are not the unique experience poor person that has a worst day in life, because we all have one worst day in life. And so I know that for, well, I believe it probably, like you said, depends on how deep it is for each individual and how deep the feelings are, how deep the history is. Personally, it helped me a lot to forgive, to understand that the person, if I'm talking about a parent, actually seeing that person as a child that didn't learn to grow as an adult, and therefore did actions from a child place and not from an adult place, and detachment from expectation that I had toward that parent.
He
And that's
detachment from the expectation.
right. And that's hard, in my work for mediation, in my work for conflict management. I always kind of encourage people to have real conversation. And I know they're not easy, but they're so essential, because it's very hard to look at yourself in a mirror and admit that you are also having a behavior that maybe comes from a childish place, that is still a little girl within that wants something from the parent, or is a little girl within that can't handle the frustration or the pain. And detaching from that is something hard, but I think essential. It's the
Yes.
maturity, and I feel peace comes. It's not, you see a lot of articles around how can I forgive? How can I finally let it go? And I think it's not one time exactly precisely. It's you're making a succession of decisions that lead you at some point to realize, oh, I feel so much more detached now. I feel more peaceful.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
And that can an analogy of like could be like someone who decides to quit drinking alcohol. That is one day at a time.
yeah.
So the healing process is one day at a time. That finding the peace that we long for, that's one day at a time. Sometimes it's an hour at a time. Sometimes it's 10 minutes at a time. But you keep putting that foot in front of the other and you keep moving towards your goal. There's going to come that day when that all that work falls into place, and you're going to find that place that you feel at home, that
Yeah.
you're okay with all of that stuff, because that little child that you're talking about takes all of that into each relationship that they encounter until there's some kind of reckoning of therapy. Or just, to be honest with you, I have been re-traumatized by some professionals. And a lot of my healing was when I decided to do something for myself.
Yeah.
So I had a licensed uh, therapist literally say to me, my husband was quite ill and I wasn't sleeping and I had a lot of anxiety. She goes, well, just fake it till you make it, and gave me a prescription for anti-anxiety drugs and Ambien CR. So those were very scary drugs to be on. And 10 years ago in 2015, I decided to wean myself off of them and take myself out of the medical loop that I had gotten myself into, because you have to go every 3 months to get blood work and refill your prescriptions and all of that. So I went to the doctor one day and everything looked good. And she goes, well, let me get your prescriptions. And I said, I'm not going to need them anymore. And she looked at me and I said, yeah, I weaned myself off of them. I'm not taking them any longer. And I loved my doctor at the time. She was my doctor for quite a few years. And I felt like I had a pretty good rapport with her. And in a joking way, she said, well, I still have 2 kids to put through college. And that was the last time I ever walked into her office.
Wow.
So, yes, ma'am. So I have seen a lot more than I could ever talk about in an hour, let me tell you. So that may have been very helpful to me, being very focused on what I needed to do to take care of myself. Because even when I turned to medical professionals, I wasn't getting the help that I felt like I really needed, or the support, or just someone to not make it seem like it was a joke. Oh yeah, fake it till you make it. That's horrible advice.
Yeah.
That's just horrible. So yeah, if anyone's listening, it's not a walk in the park. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard, but it's worth it. It's worth it. If you want to change your life, we all have the power to do that. We just have to decide. And then once we decide, then we figure out what we got to do. And when we figure out what we got to do, we do that every day. And we have to pivot or change directions and do it as many times as it takes to find that place where, okay, I think I got this and my life's going to be great. And then some other shit will happen. Something else happened. Someone died. Someone was in an accident. Someone did something. Or you got divorced, or whatever the story is. And then we have to do it again. We just don't arrive at this place. It's a journey. And that's the beautiful part. It's the beautiful part. It's the painful, beautiful life. It's just what it is. It's just life. It's one big label, and all the stuff under that label is what we deal with and how we deal with it. And we have those choices, and how we make that outcome better for us. Even when it's devastating, we can still make it better by the way we think about it. Eckhart Tolle said, it's not what's happening, it's our reaction to what's happening. So that's key. And that's helped me a lot. Of all the reading and the books and all the things that I've done, all those little tidbits that we take along the way all help,
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's wonderful. That was a very rich conversation. Thank you. If
You're
someone
so
wants to know more about you, do you want to redirect somewhere?
Anyone can find me on Facebook. That's a good place to reach out to me, or Instagram, either one. I'm on all of them,
All right. I'll put all
Instagram,
the links.
Facebook, LinkedIn. I have a presence out there. I been on all those social medias I've been an entrepreneur since I've lived in Florida. I've had 2 brick and mortar businesses, and I, like we talked about, I still do all the personal training in person, and I do online coaching. So there's all kinds of ways to get involved with me, and
If
I'm
you need a personal trainer, I would highly recommend. It's always
Thank you. I have so much fun doing that. And one of the sides of me that I didn't really bring out here is I'm quite quirky and I'm really funny. Like I'm just a funny little hoot. So like you don't even realize how hard you're working if you're laughing while you're doing
Yeah,
it. So I,
that's true.
you
That's
know,
true.
but
I'll put all the link in description that people can find it.
oh, thank you so much. You are so wonderful. And I just loved getting to know you a little bit here.